Chapter 21. Eiji knew that Lord Felix would be finished with his own work first that day, but he was still surprised when he entered the god's rooms and found his master clearly waiting for him. Lord Felix was perched, as silly a word as that seemed for such a large person, on the arm of one of the big chairs so that he was facing the door. As soon as Eiji entered, the god was on his feet and beaming at him. There was so much warmth and genuine pleasure in that smile that it, as much as habit, sent Eiji to his knees, wishing for what felt like the 100th time that he could make his full bow. "Welcome back!" the god cried. Something in Eiji loosened, something that he hadn't even realized had been clenched since his visit to his old master's rooms until it relaxed. "I wasn't wrong. I am wanted. This is my place now." His voice was warmer than usual when he replied, "Thank you, my lord." "Please rise. Is that flour, or am I turning your hair white with my antics?" Eji's nerves crackled as he tried to think of a respectful way to address the second part of the question, and finally gave up. "It's flour, my lord. Please forgive me for appearing before you in such a state." "Sweetheart, may I remind you that I appeared before you wearing the contents of a bedpan?" Even if arguing were permitted, Eiji didn't feel like contesting how very different that was, so he kept silent. "What did you do today?" The god settled properly in his chair and gestured to Eiji, who crossed the room to kneel at his feet. Immediately he relaxed further. Gods, if only it could always be like this. Unwinding with his kindly master, ready to spring into action if any service was required. "I made my deliveries, and Rokuro instructed me in bread making, my lord." Eiji didn't dare ask whether the god still held his inexplicable desires. Luckily, asking proved unnecessary. "Wonderful!" Lord Felix cried, and he truly sounded like he meant it. "Does that mean you'll be ready to teach me soon?" Eiji ducked his head. "If such is my lord's desire, it would be my honor to obey." "Thank you." Then, softly, "May I touch you?" "I welcome my lord's touch, as always." The god hummed acknowledgement and reached to run his fingers through Eji's hair, brushing away the flour. Eji's face heated, and he bit down his protests and tried to enjoy the sensation of his master's gentle hand. "Remember the list, 37. Lord Felix doesn't mind if I'm a little messy. He isn't angry about the flour. Don't panic." They were quiet for a moment, then the god spoke up. "I thought we could get your room cleaned out this evening, if you'll let me join you in there. Theo says the weather is likely to be rough tomorrow, and I'd hate for you to get hurt again." My lord, you needn't trouble yourself. I can manage." "Don't be so cruel, Eiji." The god's voice was soft and teasing enough to mostly, but not entirely, quell the spike of alarm that shot through Eiji at his words. "If you hurt your shoulder while it's still healing, Julia will knit my intestines into a scarf and force me to wear it. You can't wish that on me. Have a heart." Eiji faltered, unsure how to respond to his master's playfulness. He remembered the way everybody had teased each other at the gathering a few nights ago, and how Lord Felix had enjoyed the banter. It was clear that he wouldn't be punished if he were to play along with this joke. On the contrary, his master would no doubt be delighted. But his throat closed and his pulse raced at the very idea. Could he do it if he pretended he was just speaking with another human? No, he'd never been able to manage this kind of friendly teasing with other humans either. His jokes weren't funny, his teasing tended to be clumsy and hurtful, and he could never get his facial expressions right. For so many years, all I wanted was to be prized. Now I am, or at least I dare to think I am, but not for my manners or submission. What does that leave? That's all I have to offer. If I can't figure out why he wants me, how can I ensure that it continues? He stewed in his silence for an agonizing moment before finally spitting out, "I'm so sorry, my lord. I'm no good at teasing. Please forgive my stupidity. Dear, the last thing you are is stupid." Lord Felix rose from his chair. "Come on, let's go to your room. If I may?" "Of course, my lord." Eiji felt vaguely that he had failed and ought to crawl after his master, but his shoulder gave a phantom twinge at the very thought. Anyhow, Lord Felix didn't seem angry, and it was the god's prerogative to decide any punishments Eiji received. He walked to the bedroom instead. "Sit down, please." The god patted the bed and gave him another of those meltingly warm smiles. Eiji settled obediently on the spot he'd pointed out, though he couldn't resist the urge to fold his knees under himself instead of sitting on his ass. Making eye contact was one thing, but the idea of sloppy positioning in his master's presence offended his pride in ways he couldn't quite articulate even to himself. Fortunately, Lord Felix didn't seem to mind Eiji's creative interpretation of the word sit. He had already turned to the wardrobe and begun unloading its contents into a large basket he must have brought in with him. "I'm sorry my teasing upset you," the god said, with his back to Eiji. "Please don't worry about trying to banter with me. I don't want you to do anything that will make you uncomfortable." "Everything makes me uncomfortable." "My lord is far kinder than his unworthy servant deserves," Eiji whispered. "Never," Lord Felix replied, giving a blue robe a brisk shake that Eiji thought might be intended to hide the tender way he touched the garment. "There isn't a kindness in the world that would be more than you deserved, Eiji. I only hope I can persuade you of that one day." The god sounded a little sad, and Eiji spent a frantic moment trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong before realizing that, most likely, Lord Felix was simply saddened by packing away Hiroya's things. His belly squirmed with guilt at the idea. This wouldn't be necessary if it weren't for him, but he tried to squash the feeling down. Lord Felix himself had said that he ought to have gotten rid of these things before. "How are our friends in the kitchen?" the god asked, interrupting Eiji's frantic thoughts. "Has Norio managed to tell Rokuro that he wants him yet?" The idea was surprising enough to break the spiral entirely. "Norio what?" "Haven't you noticed?" Lord Felix tossed a smile over his shoulder, not seeming to mind Eiji's graceless and honorificless statement. "He can't keep his eyes off the man. He always wants to sit next to him." Was that true? Eiji cast his mind back over all his interactions with the two of them. True, Norio did seem to hover around Rokuro's baking station even when there was no real reason for him to be there, but Eiji couldn't recall any lingering looks. He hadn't thought to notice. Lord Felix was still talking, gossiping, Eiji would have called it if he were a human, but surely a god was above such things. "He has excellent taste, I must say. Rokuro's wonderful, and I think they'd be good together. Norio could do with a steadying influence, don't you think?" Yes, my lord." It was so strange to think of someone from his cadre with a lover. Not a friend, but still an equal. Not a master, but still a bedmate. He was used to thinking of that sort of relationship as something reserved for other people, the mysterious masses teeming outside the temple walls. Zenji and Bunto were older, and he'd just met them, so it was easy enough to accept the way their lives looked. But Norio? Someone he'd grown up with? Someone who'd been trained and dedicated to service, just like him? Of course it was possible. Norio and Rokuro were kitchen workers, not bound to any one master. If they wanted, they could choose each other. Choose. What would that be like? Eiji tried to imagine thinking over all the people he knew and just picking one. How would you even find out whether the other person wanted you back? What were the odds that out of everybody, two people would mutually choose each other? In the light of those dismal odds, asking the question sounded terrifying. What if they said no? What if they laughed at you? And then you still had to see them every day and try to pretend nothing had happened. But what if a miracle happened and they agreed? What would it feel like to realize that out of everybody, somebody wanted you for no other reason than because they thought so highly of you? How wonderful would it be if someone loved you the way Zenji and Bunta doted on each other? If they talked about you, looked after you, admired you, sought out silly excuses to spend time with you or touch you, did small things just to please you? These were foolish thoughts. Even if he had the chance to seek out a lover, Eiji would never be brave enough to ask. If he couldn't manage to keep himself together long enough to give a warning to a new offering, he'd never be able to ask somebody to love him. Still, he couldn't help hoping that things worked out for Norio and Rokuro. Do you think you could teach me about bread making tomorrow, once everyone's done cleaning up after dinner? Lord Felix asked, interrupting his thoughts again. Of course, if that is my lord's wish. Rokuro had warned that the god would want to begin as soon as possible, so Eiji had been careful to memorize all the baker's instructions today. Wonderful! Lord Felix turned, beaming. The wardrobe was empty behind him. All of Hiroya's clothes lay piled in the basket, folded neatly enough to satisfy the most exacting priests. Eiji barely even had time to admire his master's neatness before Lord Felix had dragged the trunk over and began unpacking his clothes. Eiji couldn't resist offering up a weak protest. My lord, I'm sure I could manage this. These tasks are beneath you. Lord Felix paused, then set the robe he'd been holding carefully back in the chest. For a dizzy moment, Eiji actually dared to hope that he'd persuaded his master to see his point of view. Then the god crossed the room and knelt before him, taking his hands gently in his own. Eji's gut roiled in protest at the impropriety, just as it had done the night of his accident. Before he had a chance to voice his discomfort, however, Lord Felix spoke. It pleases me to do this for you, sweetheart. I teased you about Julia wreaking vengeance on me, but the true and honest reason is that I want to do something to make your life better and try to help you feel welcome in our rooms. Please, allow me this. It made no sense, as usual. Lord Felix's words and actions were always so incomprehensible. Still, Eiji had his orders. Of course, my lord, he murmured, trapped in the softness of that gaze. Anything your servant can do to please you is a privilege and a joy. Thank you. Lord Felix dipped his face towards their clasped hands, and for a heady moment Eiji thought he was going to kiss his knuckles, as he'd done before. At the last moment, however, the god stopped himself and drew back, releasing Eji's hands with a gentle parting squeeze. Of course. I flinched away the last time he kissed my hand. Tomorrow, I'll come find you once I've washed up from the elder rooms, Lord Felix said, resuming his work in the wardrobe as if nothing had happened. Zenji wouldn't appreciate me entering his kitchen straight from my shift. I hope you'll have some patience left after your work day. You must prepare yourself for a terribly inept pupil. I will await you eagerly, my lord. Preparing himself was another thing. Somehow, Eiji was never quite prepared for Lord Felix and his mystifying ways. Tomorrow was sure to be interesting.